The sky over Europe was never truly silent during the Second World War. Engines roared, machine guns barked, and the thin blue horizon above the battlefields became a deadly stage for the most advanced flying machines humanity had ever built. At the start of the conflict, Britain's Spitfires and Hurricanes were the celebrated heroes of the Battle of Britain, graceful defenders that had proven capable of stopping Hitler's Luftwaffe from gaining air superiority. Across the Atlantic, the United States was preparing to bring its own aerial warriors to the fray. The rugged P-47 Thunderbolt, built like a flying tank, and the sleek, long-range P-51 Mustang, soon to become the scourge of German bombers and fighters alike. It was clear that air power was more than just a tool of war. It was a decisive weapon, capable of shaping the outcome of entire campaigns. But while the Allies were pushing forward with their advances in aircraft design, Germany's Luftwaffe was facing an uncomfortable truth. Their primary fighter, the Messerschmitt Bf 109, a machine that had dominated the skies in the early years of the war, was starting to show its age. It was fast and deadly, yes, but it was also reaching the limits of its design. As the Allies improved their plane's speed, firepower, and maneuverability, the Bf 109 was slowly but surely being outclassed. The Luftwaffe's leadership knew they needed something more, something faster, more powerful, more durable, and more versatile. They needed a fighter that could seize back control of the skies. Enter the Focke-Wulf Fw 190. Sleek, brutal, and unforgiving, it was everything the Luftwaffe hoped for, and everything the Allies feared. Nicknamed the Butcher Bird, this new fighter was not just an aircraft. It was a statement. It declared that Germany was not done innovating, not ready to yield the aerial battlefield. It would go on to become one of the most respected and feared fighters of the entire war, rewriting the rules of air combat and forcing the Allies into a relentless race to catch up. The story of the Fw 190 begins in the late 1930s with one man, Kurt Tank. A brilliant engineer with a deep understanding of aviation, Tank and his team at Focke-Wulf set out to design an aircraft that would surpass anything in the Luftwaffe's arsenal. Their mission was clear: create a machine that could outperform the Bf 109 in every way, faster, tougher, more agile, and more adaptable. This was no small task. The Bf 109 had been a groundbreaking aircraft when it first took to the skies in the mid-1930s, but Tank envisioned something even more formidable. A true all-purpose fighter that could not only win dogfights but also carry bombs, escort bombers, and even strike ground targets if needed. By 1939, their creation was ready for its first flight. From the very beginning, it was clear that the Fw 190 was something special. Test pilots reported that it handled beautifully, responsive, powerful, and stable even at high speeds. It climbed faster, dove harder, and rolled quicker than anything the Luftwaffe had flown before. When it entered operational service in 1941, the Allies were stunned. Suddenly, their tried-and-true fighters were being outmatched. RAF pilots who had grown accustomed to the Bf 109's performance found themselves facing an enemy that could outturn them, outclimb them, and, in many cases, outrun them. The key to the Fw 190's superiority lay in its revolutionary design philosophy. Most German fighters, including the Bf 109, used inline engines, powerful but delicate. Tank made a bold choice. He would build the Fw 190 around a radial engine, the BMW 801. This engine was heavier and bulkier, but it offered two crucial advantages: ruggedness and reliability. It could take more punishment and keep running even when damaged, and it was less vulnerable to a single well-placed bullet or shell fragment. This decision alone dramatically increased the Fw 190's chances of bringing its pilot home alive. Other design innovations pushed the aircraft even further ahead. The Fw 190's wide landing gear, for example, might seem like a minor detail, but it was a game-changer. The narrow undercarriage of the Bf 109 had been prone to accidents during takeoff and landing, a dangerous problem, especially for inexperienced pilots. The Fw 190's sturdy, widely spaced landing gear eliminated much of that risk, making it far easier to operate from rough frontline airstrips. The cockpit was another leap forward. Tank's team designed it with ergonomics and visibility in mind, giving pilots a commanding view of their surroundings and placing controls exactly where they were needed in the heat of combat. Armor plating and self-sealing fuel tanks added yet another layer of protection, making the Butcher Bird not just deadly, but survivable. The impact on the air war was immediate and dramatic. The Fw 190 quickly proved itself superior to the Spitfire Mkv, the mainstay of the Royal Air Force at the time. It was faster at most altitudes, climbed better, rolled quicker, and packed a heavier punch. Its battery of machine guns and cannons could shred enemy fighters and bombers alike, and its rugged construction meant it could often take hits and keep fighting. Allied pilots, who had grown accustomed to facing the Bf-109 on roughly even terms, suddenly found themselves at a severe disadvantage. Morale dipped, and the RAF scrambled to develop an answer. Their response came in the form of the Spitfire MiG-9, an improved variant that finally leveled the playing field. But the fact that they had been forced into this rapid upgrade was itself a testament to the Fw-190's dominance. For Luftwaffe pilots, the new fighter was a revelation. Men like Otto Kittel, who would go on to become one of Germany's highest-scoring aces, racked up kill after kill in the Fw-190. Others, like Walter Nowotny, used the aircraft's speed and firepower to devastating effect, carving their names into the annals of aerial combat history. The Butcher Bird was not just a machine. It was a force multiplier, a weapon that turned skilled pilots into legends and forced the Allies to rethink their entire approach to the air war. But the true genius of the Fw-190 was not just in its performance, it was in its adaptability. Unlike many fighters that were designed for a single purpose, the Fw-190 was a platform that could evolve. The A-Series, the original version, was a pure fighter, optimized for air-to-air combat. But as the war dragged on and the Luftwaffe's needs changed, so did the Fw-190. The F and G series variants were adapted for ground attack, fitted with armor and bomb racks that allowed them to deliver devastating strikes against enemy positions, tanks, and supply lines. These jagged bomber versions became essential tools in Germany's combined arms strategy, softening up targets before ground troops moved in. As the war intensified and the Allies began to extend their reach deeper into occupied Europe, the Luftwaffe realized it needed more than just a versatile fighter bomber. It needed a machine capable of intercepting enemy bombers flying at higher altitudes and faster speeds than ever before. This challenge led to the creation of one of the most formidable versions of the Fw-190, the D-Series, commonly known as the Dora. This new variant was no simple upgrade, it was a transformation. Fitted with the Jumo 213 inline engine, the Dora traded the radial power plant of earlier models for an engine that delivered superior high-altitude performance, allowing it to chase and destroy Allied bombers before they could reach their targets. The Dora's elongated nose and refined aerodynamics gave it a distinctive profile and a fearsome reputation. Allied pilots who had once felt comfortable at high altitude suddenly found themselves hunted by a predator designed specifically for their destruction. The Fw-190D9, often considered the pinnacle of the series, was particularly feared. It combined blistering speed with heavy armament, often mounting two 13mm machine guns and two 20mm cannons. Its high rate of climb made it a deadly interceptor, and its ability to dive and disengage from combat when needed gave its pilots tactical flexibility. For the first time in years, the Luftwaffe could once again contest the upper reaches of the sky, where four-engine bombers like the B-17 Flying Fortress and the B-24 Liberator had once operated with near impunity. The Dora's introduction caused significant losses among Allied bomber formations, and bomber crews quickly learned to dread the distinctive silhouette of the long-nosed Focke-Wulf streaking toward them from above. Yet the evolution of the Fw-190 did not stop there. Even as Germany's situation grew desperate, its engineers continued to push the boundaries of piston engine fighter design. The culmination of this relentless innovation was the Ta-152, a fighter so advanced that it was, in many ways, ahead of its time. Built on the lessons learned from earlier Fw-190 variants, the Ta-152 was designed for extreme high-altitude interception. It featured a pressurized cockpit, extended wings, and a powerful engine that allowed it to reach speeds of over 470 mph, rivaling or surpassing almost any propeller-driven aircraft of the era. In the hands of an experienced pilot, the Ta-152 could engage and defeat Allied fighters even at the very edge of the stratosphere. Unfortunately for Germany, the Ta-152 arrived too late to change the outcome of the war. By the time it entered operational service in 1945, the Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former self. Fuel shortages, a dwindling pool of experienced pilots, and relentless Allied bombing of production facilities meant that only a small number of Ta-152s ever saw combat. Those that did, however, performed exceptionally well, earning the respect of even their most determined adversaries. The Ta-152 remains one of the most advanced piston engine fighters ever built, a testament to German engineering ingenuity and a haunting what-if in aviation history. But while the FW-190's technical evolution was remarkable, its true impact lay in the role it played within the broader Luftwaffe strategy. From 1942 onward, the aircraft became the backbone of Germany's fighter force, deployed on every front and in every conceivable role. On the Eastern Front, it faced off against swarms of Soviet aircraft, where its durability and firepower proved invaluable in the harsh conditions of the Russian steppes. On the Western Front, it was the first line of defense against Allied bomber streams and the escort fighters that protected them. It even saw action in North Africa and the Mediterranean, adapting to the unique challenges of those theaters with characteristic effectiveness. One of the FW-190's most significant contributions was in the defense of the Reich itself. As Allied bombing campaigns intensified in 1943 and 1944, the skies over Germany became a constant battleground. Day after day, formations of B-17s and B-24s crossed into German airspace, escorted by swarms of P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts. The Luftwaffe's mission was clear: stop them at all costs. In this deadly struggle, the FW-190 was indispensable. Its heavy armament, often including 20mm or even 30mm cannons, made it particularly effective against bombers whose thick armor could shrug off lighter weapons. Pilots would often use the head-on pass tactic, diving directly at incoming bomber formations and opening fire at close range before breaking away. It was a dangerous maneuver, but one that could cripple or destroy a bomber with a single burst. The FW-190 also proved its worth as a ground attack aircraft, especially on the Eastern Front. In the hands of skilled pilots, the F and G series, variants wreaked havoc on Soviet armored columns, rail networks, and supply convoys. Their ability to carry bombs and rockets turned them into flying artillery pieces, and their speed and maneuverability allowed them to strike and escape before enemy defenses could react. This versatility, the ability to serve as both a frontline fighter and a devastating attack aircraft, was one of the FW-190's defining strengths. It allowed the Luftwaffe to get more value from each aircraft and gave commanders flexibility in how they deployed their limited resources. However, even the most formidable aircraft cannot change the course of a war on its own. Despite its many strengths, the FW-190 was not without flaws, and as the conflict dragged on, those flaws became increasingly apparent. One major challenge was production complexity. The FW-190's advanced design made it more difficult and time-consuming to build than older models like the Bf-109. Germany's industrial capacity, already strained by the demands of a multi-front war and the effects of Allied bombing, struggled to keep up with demand. As a result, the Luftwaffe was often unable to field enough FW-190s to match the sheer numbers of Allied aircraft being produced. Another significant issue was the growing Allied numerical advantage. By 1944, the United States and Britain were producing aircraft on an almost unimaginable scale, flooding the skies with fighters and bombers. Even the best German planes, and the FW-190 was among the best, were often outnumbered 5-1 or more. No matter how skilled a Luftwaffe pilot was, sheer numbers could overwhelm them. Allied pilots could afford to make mistakes. German pilots could not. Compounding these problems was the Luftwaffe's pilot crisis. As experienced veterans were killed or captured, they were replaced by hastily trained recruits with far less flight time and combat experience. The FW-190, for all its strengths, was a demanding aircraft to master, and inexperienced pilots often failed to unlock its full potential. Worse still, chronic fuel shortages in the final years of the war meant that many new pilots had limited opportunities to train before being thrown into combat. The result was predictable: rising losses, falling kill ratios, and a gradual erosion of the Luftwaffe's once formidable air power. Yet despite these setbacks, the FW-190 remained a formidable presence in the skies until the very end of the war. Allied pilots continued to fear encounters with the Butcher Bird, and many acknowledged that in a one-on-one fight, it was still one of the deadliest machines ever built. Its reputation endured not just because of its technological sophistication, but because of the men who flew it, pilots who, against overwhelming odds, continued to fight with skill, courage, and determination. The legend of the FW-190 grew not just from its technical brilliance or its kill counts, but from the aura it carried among those who faced it. Allied pilots spoke of it with a mix of respect and dread, and intelligence reports frequently highlighted the aircraft as one of the most significant threats in the Luftwaffe arsenal. Even when the Allies began to field newer fighters like the P-51 Mustang, capable of escorting bombers all the way to Berlin and back, They knew that a single mistake in a dogfight with a well-flown Fw-190 could still be fatal. It was this combination of fear and respect that cemented the aircraft's reputation. It was never just another German plane. It was a symbol of the Luftwaffe's tenacity, its ingenuity, and its refusal to concede control of the skies without a fight. The psychological effect of the Fw-190 was profound. In the early years of its deployment, many Allied pilots believed that Germany had somehow leapt ahead in aircraft technology. Stories circulated among bomber crews about the new German superfighter, faster, tougher, and deadlier than anything they had encountered before. Even when technical intelligence revealed the plane's specifications, the reputation it had already built was enough to sow caution and hesitation in enemy formations. Commanders adjusted tactics, altered flight paths, and even modified mission objectives to reduce the risk of encountering Fw-190 patrols. In war, fear can be as powerful as firepower, and the butcher bird wielded both with devastating effect. One of the most telling examples of the Fw-190's influence came during the Allied bombing campaigns over occupied France and Germany. Bomber crews were trained to fly in tight formations, relying on overlapping fields of defensive fire to repel attacking fighters. But the Fw-190's speed and firepower allowed it to exploit weaknesses in those formations, diving in from above or below with blistering attacks that could cripple multiple aircraft in a single pass. Some variants were even equipped with heavy cannon or rocket armament specifically designed to destroy bombers in one or two hits. In response, Allied tactics had to evolve. Escort fighters were tasked not only with protecting bombers, but also with actively hunting Fw-190s before they could reach their targets. Entire squadrons of P-47s and P-51s were often deployed solely to sweep the skies ahead of bomber streams, engaging the Luftwaffe's fighters before they could launch their deadly assaults. Meanwhile, on the Eastern Front, the Fw-190 played a very different but equally critical role. The vast expanses of the Soviet Union demanded an aircraft that could operate in harsh conditions and deliver powerful ground support, and the Fw-190 was more than up to the task. Soviet armor and mechanized units often found themselves targeted by low-flying Fw-190s armed with bombs, rockets, and cannons. These ground attack missions were brutal and effective, and they earned the aircraft a fearsome reputation among Soviet troops. Many Russian soldiers came to recognize the sound of the BMW 801 engine before they even saw the aircraft itself, a sound that often heralded destruction from above. In these roles, the Fw-190 was not just a fighter, it was a precision strike weapon, capable of tipping the balance of battles far from the skies where it first made its name. The adaptability of the Fw-190 was perhaps its greatest strength. While many other aircraft of the war were forced into narrow roles by their design limitations, the Fw-190 excelled in almost every mission it was assigned. It could escort bombers, duel with enemy fighters, hunt heavy bombers at altitude, dive bomb tanks and artillery, or strafe supply lines with devastating effectiveness. This versatility meant that the Luftwaffe could deploy the aircraft flexibly, shifting squadrons between air superiority, interception, and close air support missions as the strategic situation demanded. It was, in many ways, the Swiss Army knife of the Luftwaffe, a single platform capable of performing the roles of several specialized aircraft. Despite this versatility, however, the Luftwaffe was fighting a losing battle. By late 1944, the Allies had achieved overwhelming superiority in the air. The skies over Germany were thick with American and British aircraft, and the Luftwaffe's ability to contest them was shrinking by the day. Production delays, raw material shortages, and the relentless bombing of aircraft factories all contributed to a situation in which even the best designs could not be fielded in sufficient numbers. Worse still, the quality of German pilots continued to decline as the war dragged on. The elite aces of the early years, men who had cut their teeth in the Spanish Civil War or the early Blitzkrieg campaigns, were gone, replaced by hastily trained rookies who often had only a fraction of the flight hours needed to master the Fw-190's capabilities. The Luftwaffe tried to compensate for these challenges with increasingly desperate tactics. Some Fw-190 units began to specialize in ramming attacks against bomber formations, sacrificing aircraft, and sometimes pilots, to inflict maximum damage. Others experimented with Sturmgruppen, heavily armored Fw-190 formations designed to penetrate bomber defenses and destroy as many aircraft as possible at close range. These tactics were effective in isolated instances, but they could not stem the tide. Allied numbers were simply too great, and their strategic bombing campaigns continued to cripple Germany's industrial base. Even so, the Fw-190 refused to fade quietly into obscurity. Right up until the final days of the war, it remained a potent adversary. In the chaotic air battles over Berlin in 1945, Fw-190s could still be seen diving into the fray, often piloted by young men with little hope of victory, but every intention of fighting to the last. In these final moments, the Butcher Bird became more than just a machine of war. It became a symbol of defiance. It represented the resilience of a nation fighting against overwhelming odds and the determination of its pilots to continue the fight, even when defeat was all but inevitable. The legacy of the Fw-190 did not end with Germany's surrender. In the post-war years, aviation experts from around the world studied captured examples of the aircraft in detail. Its design features, and from its wide landing gear to its rugged airframe and pilot-friendly cockpit, influenced the next generation of fighters. Some of these lessons found their way into early jet aircraft, shaping the transition from piston engines to the new era of jet propulsion. In France, the Fw-190's legacy took an even more direct form. Captured airframes and parts were used to produce the NC-born 900, a French-built version of the Fw-190 that saw limited service in the immediate post-war period. It was a rare and ironic twist, a machine designed to defend Nazi Germany now flying under the colors of one of its former enemies. For many historians and aviation enthusiasts, the Fw-190 stands as one of the most significant aircraft of the Second World War. It was not the most produced. That honor belonged to the Bf-109, nor was it the most technologically advanced by the war's end. But it struck a balance between power, versatility, and survivability that few other fighters could match. It forced the Allies to adapt and innovate, driving rapid advancements in their own aircraft technology. And it left an indelible mark on the evolution of aerial warfare, demonstrating that a truly great fighter must be more than just fast or powerful. It must be adaptable, resilient, and capable of excelling in multiple roles. The story of the Fw-190 is, in many ways, a story about the evolution of war itself, about how necessity drives innovation, and how the pressures of conflict can lead to leaps in technology that might have otherwise taken decades. When Kurt Tank and his team began designing the aircraft in the late 1930s, they could not have known how profoundly it would shape the future of aerial combat. Yet every decision they made, from the choice of engine to the placement of armor plating, reflected a deep understanding of what modern warfare demanded. They were not building a machine for show or prestige. They were building a weapon designed to survive the brutal realities of combat and deliver decisive results. That focus on practicality, combined with cutting-edge engineering, is what made the Fw-190 such a masterpiece of wartime design. Consider, for instance, the decision to use a radial engine. At the time, many experts, especially in Germany, considered inline engines to be the superior choice for high-performance fighters. They were more aerodynamic, allowing for sleeker designs and higher top speeds. But they were also more vulnerable to battle damage. A single bullet through a coolant line could knock an inline engine out of action, forcing the pilot to bail out or attempt a crash landing. Radial engines, by contrast, were air-cooled and more robust, capable of sustaining significant damage and continuing to function. This was a crucial advantage in the chaotic, high-intensity dogfights of World War II. It meant that an Fw-190 could take hits that would down other aircraft and still make it home. In a war where pilot experience was invaluable and every sortie counted, that survivability was priceless. The Fw-190's design also reflected an acute awareness of pilot needs. Its cockpit layout was clean and intuitive, allowing pilots to operate the aircraft efficiently even under extreme stress. Visibility was another priority. The canopy design offered excellent all-around views, giving pilots a crucial edge in spotting enemy aircraft, often the difference between life and death in an aerial duel. Even the controls were engineered with precision, providing a balance of responsiveness and stability that made the Fw-190 both agile and forgiving. This emphasis on pilot-centric design set a new standard for fighter aircraft and influenced cockpit layouts for years to come. Equally impressive was the aircraft's firepower. Early variants of the Fw-190 typically carried a mix of machine guns and 20mm cannons, giving them a devastating punch against both fighters and bombers. Later versions increased this armament even further, sometimes mounting 30mm cannons capable of tearing through the armor of Allied heavy bombers with alarming ease. This heavy armament made the Fw-190 one of the most lethal interceptors of the war. Allied bomber crews often reported that a single burst from a Butcher Bird could cripple or destroy a B-17 in seconds. The aircraft's ability to deliver such overwhelming firepower, combined with its speed and maneuverability, made it a nightmare for bomber formations, and a major factor in the Luftwaffe's continued effectiveness, even as the strategic balance shifted against Germany. The aircraft's role in ground attack operations further demonstrated its versatility. The F and G series variants were equipped to carry bombs, rockets, and other ordnance, turning the Fw-190 into a formidable close-air support platform. On the Eastern Front, these variants played a critical role in slowing Soviet advances, destroying tanks, artillery, and troop concentrations with precision strikes. In some cases, entire offensives were delayed or disrupted by concentrated Fw-190 ground attack missions. These aircraft could dive steeply on their targets, deliver their payloads with deadly accuracy, and then use their speed to escape before enemy defenses could respond. This ability to switch seamlessly between air-to-air and air-to-ground roles gave the Luftwaffe a level of tactical flexibility that few other air forces could match. Of course, the Fw-190's success was not achieved in isolation. It was part of a broader ecosystem of German aviation technology, tactics, and doctrine. The Luftwaffe's emphasis on aggressive, forward-leaning tactics played a significant role in maximizing the aircraft's potential. German pilots were trained to take the initiative, striking hard and fast before the enemy could react. They were taught to exploit their aircraft's strengths, its climb rate, its roll speed, its firepower, and to avoid prolonged dogfights where numerical superiority could overwhelm them. In this context, the Fw-190 was the perfect tool, fast enough to dictate the terms of engagement, powerful enough to end a fight quickly, and rugged enough to survive the encounter. Yet for all its brilliance, the Fw-190 was still a product of its time, and that time was one of relentless escalation. Every innovation it introduced was eventually countered by an Allied response. The Spitfire Mk9, the P-51 Mustang, and the late-war versions of the P-47 Thunderbolt all narrowed or even erased the performance gap. Improvements in radar and ground control allowed the Allies to anticipate Luftwaffe attacks more effectively, reducing the element of surprise. And the sheer scale of Allied industrial output meant that even when the Fw-190 shot down dozens of aircraft, hundreds more were ready to take their place. The Butcher Bird was an extraordinary machine, but it could not overcome the strategic realities of a global conflict that had turned decisively against Germany. Still, its influence extended far beyond its kill tally or its wartime achievements. The Fw-190 redefined what a fighter aircraft could be. It showed that speed and agility were not enough, that survivability, versatility, and pilot-centric design were equally important. It demonstrated the value of designing an aircraft that could evolve, adapting to new roles and new challenges as the war progressed. And it proved that even in the face of overwhelming odds, superior engineering and tactical innovation could change the course of battles, if not the war itself. Even Allied pilots, many of whom lost friends and comrades to the Fw-190, expressed admiration for the aircraft. Some called it the best piston-engine fighter of the war. Others admitted that in a one-on-one fight, they would rather face almost anything else. It was a machine that commanded respect, not just because it was deadly, but because it embodied the essence of aerial warfare: speed, power, resilience, and adaptability, all wrapped into a single, deadly package. The post-war years would only enhance this reputation. As aviation technology surged forward into the jet age, engineers continued to study the lessons of the Fw-190. Its design principles influenced not only early jet fighters, but also many of the tactics and doctrines that would define aerial combat in the Cold War. The concept of a multi-role fighter, a single aircraft capable of performing a wide range of missions, owes much to the example set by the Butcher Bird. Even today, many aviation historians consider it one of the most well-balanced and forward-thinking designs of the propeller era. By the final year of the war, the Fw-190 had already carved its name into the annals of aviation history. But as the situation for Germany deteriorated, its story entered a darker, more desperate chapter, one marked by innovation born not from ambition but from necessity. The Luftwaffe was being pushed to its limits. Allied bombers roamed German skies almost unopposed. Cities lay in ruins, industrial production was in disarray, and every mission was a battle not just against enemy aircraft but against dwindling fuel supplies, spare parts shortages, and logistical collapse. And yet, even amid this chaos, the Fw-190 continued to evolve, adapting to the brutal realities of a war Germany was rapidly losing. One of the most significant adaptations in this period was the development of specialized anti-bomber units known as Sturmgruppen. These formations were created in response to the devastating effectiveness of Allied strategic bombing campaigns. As four-engine bombers like the B-17 and B-24 pounded German cities and infrastructure day after day, the Luftwaffe realized that conventional fighter tactics were no longer sufficient. Lightly armed interceptors could inflict some damage, but they were often unable to bring down the heavily armored bombers before being driven off by defensive fire or escort fighters. The solution was to modify the Fw-190 for a single, brutal purpose: the destruction of Allied heavy bombers. The Fw-190s assigned to Sturmgruppen units were heavily modified. Additional armor plating was added to protect the cockpit and engine, and the aircraft's armament was upgraded to include devastating 30mm cannons capable of tearing through bomber fuselages with just a few hits. These modifications came at a cost. The extra weight reduced speed and maneuverability, but the trade-off was worth it. The Sturmgruppen pilots did not need to outmaneuver enemy fighters. Their mission was to get in close and deliver lethal blows to the bombers. Many of these pilots adopted a tactic known as the head-on pass, diving straight into bomber formations and opening fire at point-blank range before pulling away at the last second. Others, in acts of desperation and sacrifice, even rammed enemy bombers when their ammunition was spent or their aircraft damaged beyond recovery. The Sturmgruppen achieved some notable successes, destroying large numbers of bombers in concentrated assaults. But these victories came at a terrible price. The heavy armor and slower speed of the modified Fw-190s made them easy targets for Allied escort fighters, which often swarmed the lumbering attackers before they could reach their targets. Casualties among Sturmgruppen pilots were extraordinarily high, and many of Germany's most experienced aviators were lost in these daring but costly missions. Still, their efforts reflected the lengths to which the Luftwaffe was willing to go to stem the tide of Allied bombing, and the enduring versatility of the Fw-190, which could be adapted even for suicidal missions if the situation demanded it. Even as the Luftwaffe struggled to defend its skies, the Fw-190 continued to play a crucial role on the ground. On the Eastern Front, where the war was increasingly defined by massive Soviet offensives and relentless mechanized assaults, the Fw-190's ground attack variants proved invaluable. Operating in brutal conditions, freezing temperatures, muddy airstrips, and skies often swarming with enemy aircraft, these fighters provided essential support to German ground forces. They attacked tank columns, destroyed bridges, and targeted supply lines, often turning the tide of local engagements even when the broader strategic picture was bleak. Soviet soldiers came to dread the distinctive howl of an Fw-190 diving toward them, its cannons blazing and bombs dropping with deadly accuracy. Despite these tactical successes, however, the larger picture continued to darken. By 1944, Germany was no longer fighting to win the war. It was fighting to delay defeat. Allied bombing campaigns were systematically dismantling its industrial base, and vital resources like fuel and aluminum were becoming increasingly scarce. Many Fw-190 units were grounded simply because there was not enough fuel to keep them flying. Others were forced to operate with reduced armament or without essential spare parts. Maintenance crews scavenged wrecked aircraft for usable components, and pilots were often sent into combat with machines that were barely airworthy. The Luftwaffe, once the terror of European skies, was now fighting a desperate rearguard action against overwhelming odds. And yet, even in this desperate situation, the Fw-190 continued to inspire awe. Allied pilots, flush with numerical superiority and technological advances, still treated encounters with the butcher bird with caution and respect. Many American and British veterans would later recall the Fw-190 as one of the most formidable opponents they faced, a machine that demanded their full attention and skill, even in the waning days of the war. For every bomber that reached its target unscathed, there were others that limped home riddled with holes or failed to return at all, victims of the Fw-190's deadly firepower. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Fw-190's legacy is how long it remained relevant despite the rapid pace of aviation development during the war. When it first entered service in 1941, it was unquestionably ahead of its time. By 1945, despite 4 years of technological leaps on all sides, it was still one of the most capable piston engine fighters in the world. This longevity speaks volumes about the strength of its original design. While many aircraft introduced in the early years of the war were obsolete by the end, the Fw-190 continued to hold its own against the latest Allied fighters, adapting to new threats and evolving into new roles with remarkable ease. It is also worth noting the profound impact the Fw-190 had on pilot morale, both German and Allied. For Luftwaffe pilots, it was a source of pride and confidence, a machine they trusted with their lives and believed could give them an edge even against superior numbers. For Allied pilots, it was a benchmark, a standard by which they measured their own aircraft and tactics. The knowledge that the enemy possessed such a capable fighter pushed Allied engineers to design better planes, pushed pilots to hone their skills, and pushed commanders to develop new strategies. In this way, the Fw-190 did more than fight battles. It shaped the evolution of air warfare itself. The end of the war brought an inevitable conclusion to the Fw-190's combat career, but it did not erase its influence. Many captured examples were studied extensively by Allied engineers who were eager to learn from its design. Lessons learned from the Fw-190 informed the development of early jet fighters, particularly in areas such as cockpit ergonomics, armament configuration, and structural durability. Even decades later, elements of its design philosophy could be seen in aircraft that owed their lineage to the lessons of World War II. The Butcher bird had not just fought a war, it had helped define the future of military aviation. As the world transitioned from the chaos of global war to an uneasy post-war peace, the lessons learned from the Fw-190's service continued to resonate. Aviation was entering a new age, one defined by jet propulsion, radar-guided weapons, and supersonic flight. But the principles embodied by the Butcher bird still shaped design philosophies well into the Cold War. Engineers in the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union all studied captured examples of the Fw-190, dissecting every element of its design to understand why it had been so successful. They found a machine that balanced competing priorities with rare precision, speed and firepower, maneuverability and toughness, versatility and specialization. These were qualities that would become the foundation of future fighter development. Even beyond its technological influence, the Fw-190 offered enduring lessons about strategy and doctrine. During the war, its versatility had allowed the Luftwaffe to adapt quickly to changing battlefield conditions, shifting from offensive operations to defensive interception, from air superiority missions to close air support. In many ways, this flexibility foreshadowed the multi-role fighters of the jet age, aircraft like the F-4 Phantom or the MiG-21, which would dominate the skies in the decades to come. The concept that a single platform could excel in multiple roles, that it did not need to be a specialist to be effective, was one of the most significant strategic lessons of World War II, and it was a lesson the Fw-190 had taught, better than almost any other aircraft. But the Fw-190's story is not just about machines, technology, and tactics. It is also about the people who flew them, men who lived and died in the thin air above Europe, whose skill and bravery shaped the course of the war as much as any weapon. For many Luftwaffe pilots, the Fw-190 was more than a tool of war. It was a trusted companion, a machine that could be relied upon to deliver them safely through the chaos of battle. Ace pilots like Otto Kittel, who claimed 267 aerial victories before his death in 1945, or Walter Nowotny, whose innovative tactics helped redefine fighter combat, owed much of their success to the capabilities of the Butcher bird. These men pushed the aircraft to its limits, exploiting every ounce of its performance and proving again and again that in the hands of a skilled pilot, the Fw-190 was a nearly unbeatable opponent. Yet their stories are also a sobering reminder of the human cost of war. Many of the Luftwaffe's finest pilots did not live to see the end of the conflict. They were shot down in desperate dogfights, lost in fiery collisions with bombers, or killed on the ground as Allied air power obliterated their airfields. By 1945, the Luftwaffe's ranks were filled with teenagers and hastily trained recruits, many of whom had barely a few dozen flight hours before being thrown into combat. For them, the Fw-190 was both a lifeline and a last hope, a powerful machine that offered a fighting chance, even when the odds were hopelessly stacked against them. The Allied pilots who faced the Fw-190 had their own stories to tell. Many spoke of the respect they held for the aircraft and the men who flew it. They learned quickly that underestimating the Butcher bird was a fatal mistake. Even late in the war, when the Luftwaffe was a shell of its former self, encounters with Fw-190s could still be deadly. Pilots of the 8th Air Force flying long-range escort missions over Germany often described their relief when they returned from a sortie without having to engage one. Bomber crews, too, spoke of the terror they felt when Fw-190s appeared on the horizon, sleek, menacing shapes diving toward them with guns blazing. their 20mm and 30mm shells tearing through steel and aluminum like paper. In some cases, respect even turned into admiration. After the war, Allied pilots who examined captured FW-190s often expressed amazement at the aircraft's ruggedness and handling characteristics. Many admitted that if they had been forced to fly a German fighter, they would have chosen the FW-190 over the Bf-109 without hesitation. It was, they said, a pilot's airplane, powerful, responsive, and forgiving, yet deadly when used correctly. It demanded respect, both from those who flew it and from those who fought against it. The FW-190 also left its mark on civilian aviation. While its primary legacy lay in military design, some of the lessons learned from its construction found their way into commercial aircraft development in the post-war years. The emphasis on pilot visibility, cockpit ergonomics, and structural resilience influenced the design of passenger planes and cargo aircraft alike. Even the concept of modularity, the idea that a single airframe could be adapted for multiple roles, became a standard practice in aerospace engineering, applied not just to military fighters but to transport and reconnaissance aircraft as well. Today, the FW-190 occupies a special place in aviation history. It is remembered not only as one of the greatest fighters of World War II, but also as a symbol of an era when the limits of technology were tested on a near-daily basis. Museums around the world proudly display restored examples of the aircraft, and enthusiasts continue to fly a handful of airworthy models at air shows where the growl of the BMW 801 radial engine still turns heads and stirs the imagination. Each flight is more than just a demonstration of engineering prowess. It is a living tribute to the pilots who flew these machines in anger and to the engineers who built them under the most challenging conditions imaginable. The legacy of the FW-190 also lives on in the countless books, documentaries, and films that have explored its story. Historians continue to debate its place among the pantheon of World War II fighters, comparing it to legends like the Spitfire, Mustang, and Zero. Most agree that while it may not have been the most numerous or the most famous, it was among the most balanced, a perfect synthesis of power, agility, firepower, and resilience. It was, in many ways, the ideal piston engine fighter and one of the last of its kind before the jet age rendered such machines obsolete. For aviation enthusiasts, the Butcher Bird represents a golden age of flight, a time when aircraft were not just machines but expressions of national character and engineering philosophy. The FW-190, with its rugged construction and no-nonsense design, reflected the German emphasis on precision, durability, and efficiency. It was a weapon built for a total war designed to survive the worst and deliver the best. And even though it ultimately could not turn the tide of the conflict, its influence reached far beyond the battlefields of Europe. The story of the FW-190 is ultimately one of triumph and tragedy, innovation and desperation. It is the story of how a single aircraft changed the course of a war, and how that war, in turn, shaped the destiny of that aircraft. From its first flights in 1939 to its final battles in 1945, the Butcher Bird was a symbol of Germany's relentless drive to dominate the skies. And though it failed in that mission, it succeeded in leaving a legacy that endures to this day, a legacy of engineering brilliance, tactical innovation, and indomitable spirit. As the dust of war settled and Europe struggled to rebuild from the ashes, the legacy of the FW-190 took on new dimensions. For many, it was not just a machine, but a symbol of a bygone era, an era when aerial combat was personal, visceral, and fought at close range with cannons and machine guns rather than missiles and radar locks. The post-war jet age was dawning, and with it came an entirely new generation of aircraft that would soon eclipse even the finest piston-engine fighters of the Second World War. Yet, despite this technological leap, the FW-190 remained an enduring reference point, a benchmark against which future designs were measured, and a subject of fascination for historians, engineers, and aviation enthusiasts alike. One of the most interesting aspects of the FW-190's legacy was the influence it had on post-war aircraft development, not just in Germany's former enemies, but in countries around the world. In the Soviet Union, engineers who examined captured examples were struck by the simplicity and durability of its design. They noted how the radial engine, once dismissed by many European designers as outdated, offered not just power, but also resilience, a lesson that would shape the development of many Cold War-era Soviet aircraft. In Britain, the FW-190's heavy armament and rugged construction informed the design philosophy behind several post-war fighters, including the Hawker Sea Fury, one of the last and most powerful piston-engine fighters ever built. And in the United States, the lessons of the Butcher Bird would echo through the design of early jet fighters like the F-86 Sabre, which combined speed and agility with ruggedness and adaptability in much the same way. Even West Germany itself, reborn as a democratic state in the 1950s and eventually rearming under NATO, did not forget the engineering lessons of the Fw-190. Many of the same design philosophies that had defined Kurt Tank's masterpiece reappeared in later German aircraft, in the emphasis on balanced performance, in the insistence on pilot visibility and ergonomics, and in the belief that survivability was just as important as raw speed. The DNA of the Butcher Bird lived on, even if the world that had created it was gone forever. The Fw-190 also continued to capture the public imagination in the decades after the war. Aviation historians pored over every detail of its design, debating its strengths and weaknesses in comparison to its contemporaries. Was it truly superior to the Spitfire? Did it outperform the Mustang? Was it more versatile than the P-47? These debates continue to this day, often without definitive answers. What most experts agree on, however, is that the Fw-190 was one of the most well-rounded fighters of the war, a machine that excelled in virtually every role it was assigned. It might not have had the sheer range of the Mustang, nor the altitude performance of the Spitfire McD-13th, but in terms of all-around capability, speed, firepower, toughness, and versatility, few aircraft could match it. Reenactments, documentaries, and even video games have helped keep the memory of the Fw-190 alive for new generations. At air shows around the world, the sight and sound of a restored Butcher Bird taking to the skies is a visceral reminder of a time when victory or defeat could hinge on a split-second decision and the turn of a joystick. Aviation museums often place the Fw-190 front and center in their World War II exhibits, not just because of its historical significance, but because of the fascination it continues to inspire. Children stare in awe at its muscular profile and powerful engine, while veterans and enthusiasts speak in reverent tones about its performance and its role in shaping the course of the war. But beyond its technological and historical importance, the Fw-190 also invites deeper reflection on the nature of war itself. It was, after all, a weapon, a machine designed to kill and destroy. Its beauty, its engineering brilliance, and its effectiveness cannot be separated from the violence and suffering it inflicted. Thousands of Allied airmen died under its guns, their bombers torn apart by its cannons, or their fighters sent spiraling to the ground. Countless civilians on the ground were killed or injured in the bombing raids that the Fw-190 sought to stop or enable. Like all weapons of war, it was both a marvel of human ingenuity and a testament to humanity's capacity for destruction. This duality, the coexistence of technological achievement and moral complexity, is at the heart of the Fw-190's story. It is what makes the aircraft so compelling, even 8 decades after its first flight. The same qualities that make it an engineering masterpiece, its power, its efficiency, its adaptability, are also what made it such an effective instrument of war. To admire the Fw-190 is, in a sense, to grapple with that paradox. To acknowledge the brilliance of its design while remembering the human cost of its use. The pilots who flew the Fw-190 understood this paradox better than anyone. Many Luftwaffe veterans spoke after the war about the conflicting emotions they felt, pride in their aircraft and their skills, but also sorrow for the destruction they had helped unleash. Some expressed admiration for their former enemies, recognizing that the men they fought against were motivated by the same sense of duty and patriotism. Others struggled with guilt and trauma, haunted by the memories of comrades lost and missions that ended in tragedy. The Fw-190 was their weapon, but it was also their burden, a constant reminder of the thin line between heroism and horror. It is this human dimension that gives the story of the Fw-190 its enduring resonance. Technology alone cannot explain its impact. It was the men who designed it, built it, and flew it who brought it to life and gave it meaning. Their stories, of courage and skill, of sacrifice and loss, are woven into the fabric of the aircraft's history. And in telling their stories, we gain a deeper understanding not just of the Butcher Bird itself, but of the war in which it played such a pivotal role. Today, as aviation continues to evolve at a pace Kurt Tank could scarcely have imagined, the Fw-190 remains a touchstone, a reminder of how far we have come and how much we owe to the pioneers of the past. Modern fighter jets, with their stealth coatings, supersonic speeds, and advanced avionics, may seem a world apart from the piston-engined warbirds of the 1940s. Yet the principles that guided the design of the Fw-190, balance, adaptability, and the primacy of the pilot remain as relevant as ever. In many ways, the aircraft was ahead of its time, pointing the way toward a future it would never see but help to shape. The enduring fascination with the FW-190 is not just about nostalgia for a bygone era. It is also about what the aircraft represents, the pinnacle of human ingenuity under pressure, the relentless drive to innovate in the face of adversity, and the complex interplay between technology, strategy, and humanity. It is a story that speaks to the best and worst of us, our capacity to create and to destroy, to dream and to devastate. The story of the FW-190 also provides a fascinating lens through which to view the evolution of air combat itself. When it first took to the skies in 1939, aerial warfare was still relatively new in its modern form. The lessons of World War I had shaped aircraft tactics, but technology had advanced so rapidly that those lessons were already being rewritten. Fighters were faster, stronger, and more heavily armed than ever before, and the scale of aerial engagements had expanded dramatically. No longer were dogfights small, isolated duels between individual pilots. Now they were sprawling, coordinated battles involving dozens or even hundreds of aircraft, often spread across vast distances and linked to complex ground operations below. The FU-190 emerged right in the middle of this transformation, and in many ways it helped define the next stage of it. Early in the war, fighters were often designed with narrow, specialized roles in mind: interceptors to defend the homeland, light fighters to achieve air superiority, and bombers to strike strategic targets. The Butcher Bird broke that mold. It proved that a single aircraft could excel across multiple roles. It could dogfight with enemy fighters, shred bomber formations, dive bomb tanks, and escort bombers deep into enemy territory. This multi-role concept would later become a cornerstone of modern fighter design, but in the early 1940s, it was revolutionary. It was not just the aircraft itself that changed how air battles were fought. It was the tactics it enabled. The FW-190's exceptional roll rate and climb performance allowed German pilots to develop new maneuvers that took advantage of its strengths. Boom and zoom tactics, where a fighter would dive from altitude at high speed to strike an opponent and then climb back to safety, became a staple of Luftwaffe doctrine, especially against more agile but slower-turning enemy aircraft. The heavy armament of the FW-190 also encouraged more aggressive attack strategies. Instead of prolonged turning battles, pilots could deliver a devastating burst of fire and disengage, relying on their superior speed and climb rate to escape retaliation. On the strategic level, the presence of the FW-190 forced the Allies to rethink their approach to air power. Before its introduction, bomber formations had often flown deep into enemy territory without significant fighter escort, relying on defensive gunner fire and tight formations to protect themselves. The devastating losses inflicted by FW-190 units quickly exposed the flaws in that strategy. The Allies responded by developing long-range escort fighters like the P-51 Mustang, capable of accompanying bombers all the way to their targets and back. This shift, from unescorted bomber raids to fully integrated air operations combining bombers, fighters, and reconnaissance, marked a turning point in the air war and set the template for future conflicts. The psychological dimension of air combat also evolved in response to the FW-190. Allied pilots had to confront an enemy that was not only technologically formidable, but also tactically unpredictable. The fear of sudden high-speed attacks from above or behind added a new layer of complexity to dogfighting. Many pilots spoke of the constant tension they felt when flying missions over German-held territory. The knowledge that somewhere above or behind them, a butcher bird might be lurking, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This psychological pressure, though less tangible than bullets and bombs, was a powerful weapon in its own right. The aircraft's influence even extended into the realm of propaganda. The Luftwaffe was quick to capitalize on the FW-190's fearsome reputation, using it as a symbol of German technological prowess and martial strength. Posters, newsreels, and radio broadcasts hailed it as an unstoppable force, a machine that could sweep Allied aircraft from the skies and secure victory for the Reich. For a time, these claims were not far from the truth. Allied pilots genuinely struggled to match the FW-190's capabilities in its early years, and the aircraft's victories were trumpeted as evidence of German superiority. But as the war turned against Germany, the propaganda shifted. The FW-190 was no longer portrayed as an invincible weapon of conquest, but as a stalwart defender of the homeland, a last line of defense against the overwhelming might of the Allies. In this way, the butcher bird mirrored the trajectory of the war itself, evolving from an instrument of aggression to a symbol of desperate resistance. On the front lines, the human experience of flying the FW-190 remained as intense and unforgiving as ever. Pilots spoke of the physical demands of flying the aircraft in combat, the crushing G-forces of high-speed maneuvers, the deafening roar of the engine, the violent shudder of the airframe when cannons fired. Every mission was a test of skill, endurance, and nerve. Mistakes were rarely forgiven. A moment's hesitation or a poorly timed maneuver could mean death, either from enemy fire or a catastrophic crash. And yet, for many pilots, the thrill of flying the FW-190 outweighed the risks. They spoke of the exhilaration of rolling into a steep dive, guns blazing, or of pulling hard into a climb with the engine screaming and the horizon falling away beneath them. In those moments, they felt invincible, part of a machine that seemed almost alive. This connection between pilot and aircraft, this sense of trust and symbiosis, is one of the reasons the FW-190 continues to fascinate historians and enthusiasts. Unlike many later aircraft, which would rely increasingly on technology and automation, the Butcher bird demanded constant input from its pilot. It was not a machine that flew itself, it was a machine that responded to the skill and instincts of the person in the cockpit. Success or failure depended as much on the man as on the machine. In an age before guided missiles and computer-assisted targeting, victory in the skies was still a deeply human endeavor. The FW-190 also highlighted the growing importance of logistics and industry in modern warfare. No matter how advanced a fighter was, it was only as effective as the infrastructure that supported it. The Luftwaffe's struggles to produce enough aircraft, supply enough fuel, and train enough pilots ultimately undermined the FW-190's impact. This was a lesson the Allies took to heart, investing heavily in production capacity, pilot training programs, and maintenance networks. By the end of the war, the United States alone was producing thousands of aircraft a month, a scale of industrial output Germany could never hope to match. This imbalance ensured that even the most advanced German designs could not alter the strategic outcome. Yet despite these limitations, the FW-190's legacy endured. It proved that quality could, at least for a time, offset quantity. It demonstrated that innovative design and superior performance could challenge even a numerically superior enemy. And it showed that an aircraft's true power lay not just in its specifications, but in how it was used, in the tactics it enabled, the strategies it shaped, and the fear it inspired. The lessons of the FW-190 remain relevant even today. Modern air forces continue to grapple with the balance between specialization and versatility, between high performance and ease of production, between technological sophistication and logistical sustainability. These are the same challenges that Kurt Tank and his team faced more than 80 years ago, and the solutions they developed, in many cases, still influence the answers we arrive at today. By the time the war drew to its bloody conclusion in 1945, the FW-190 had already cemented its place as one of the defining aircraft of the conflict. It had fought on every front where the Luftwaffe was active, from the icy skies over the Eastern Front to the sun-scorched deserts of North Africa, from the rolling fields of France to the bomb-ravaged cities of Germany itself. It had engaged in every type of mission imaginable, from dogfights with nimble Allied fighters to head-on assaults against heavily armed bomber formations, from precision ground attacks to desperate defensive sorties in the final days of the Reich. Few aircraft in history have been as versatile, as widely used, or as deeply embedded in the fabric of a war as the FW-190. The final months of its service were among the most desperate and dramatic. As Allied forces closed in on Germany from all sides, the Luftwaffe found itself in a fight for survival. The once dominant air force was now badly outnumbered, its resources exhausted, its infrastructure shattered by relentless bombing. Fuel was so scarce that pilots were sometimes forced to limit training flights to a handful of minutes or even skip them altogether. Spare parts were almost impossible to come by, forcing ground crews to cannibalize wrecked aircraft to keep a few airworthy. Many FW-190 squadrons were reduced to a fraction of their former strength, with some units flying just a handful of aircraft against overwhelming waves of Allied planes. And yet, despite the hopelessness of the situation, the Butcher bird continued to fight. In the skies above Berlin, Cologne, and Hamburg, FW-190s launched last-ditch interception missions against Allied bomber raids, sometimes taking off from makeshift airstrips hastily carved out of farmland or highways. Many of the pilots in these missions were barely out of their teens, with minimal flight experience and little hope of survival. Still, they climbed into their aircraft and took to the skies, driven by duty, desperation, or sheer determination. They knew they could not turn the tide of the war, but they also knew they could still inflict damage, still defend their homeland, still fight with honor to the very end. These final battles often had an air of tragedy about them. In one engagement after another, small groups of FW-190s hurled themselves against vast formations of Allied bombers and fighters, scoring some kills but suffering devastating losses in return. Many were shot down before they even reached their targets, their pilots never returning home. Others were destroyed on the ground, caught by strafing runs as they taxied for takeoff. The Luftwaffe's collapse was inevitable, but the courage and determination of its pilots, and the enduring effectiveness of the FW-190, ensured that Germany's air defenses remained dangerous right up to the final days of the war. When the guns finally fell silent in May 1945, the Butcher Bird had written a story of extraordinary impact. More than 20,000 FW-190s had been built in total, making it one of the most produced fighter aircraft of the conflict. It had served not only with the Luftwaffe, but also with several of Germany's allies, including Hungary, Romania, and Turkey. It had evolved through dozens of variants, each one tailored to meet the shifting demands of a war that was constantly changing. And it had left an indelible mark on the pilots who flew it, the enemies who fought against it, and the civilians whose lives were shaped by the battles it fought. The end of the war did not mean the end of the FW-190's story. Captured examples were flown and tested extensively by the victorious Allies who were eager to learn from its design. The British Royal Aircraft Establishment, for example, conducted a series of tests on captured FW-190s to better understand their performance and handling characteristics. American engineers, too, examined the aircraft closely, comparing its features to those of their own fighters and incorporating lessons learned into future designs. The Soviets, meanwhile, were particularly interested in the aircraft's ruggedness and adaptability, qualities they sought to emulate in their own post-war fighters. In some cases, the FW-190 even continued to serve after the war. France, which had captured several intact airframes during the liberation, refurbished and put them into service as the NC-900 in the late 1940s. Though only produced in limited numbers, these aircraft symbolized the ironic twist of history. A machine once built to destroy the Allies now serving one of them in a new era of peace. Other captured FW-190s found their way into museums, private collections, and research facilities, where they became valuable tools for understanding the technology and tactics of the war that had just ended. The aircraft's post-war influence extended beyond the realm of engineering. In the years and decades that followed, the FW-190 became a subject of fascination for historians, writers, filmmakers, and enthusiasts. Books chronicled its development and combat history in meticulous detail. Documentaries explored the stories of the men who flew it and the battles it shaped. Scale models of the Butcher Bird became staples of hobby shops around the world, while flight simulators allowed new generations to experience, virtually at least, the thrill of piloting one. The aircraft's distinctive silhouette, the broad wings, the powerful radial engine, the muscular fuselage, became an icon of World War II aviation, instantly recognizable even to those with only a passing interest in the conflict. Over time, the FW-190 also came to symbolize broader themes: innovation under pressure, the relentless march of technology, and the complex interplay between strategy and engineering. It represented both the heights of human ingenuity and the depths of human conflict. It was a reminder that even the most advanced technology is ultimately shaped by the context in which it is created, by the political ambitions, strategic imperatives, and human choices that drive nations to war. The Butcher Bird was a marvel of design, but it was also a product of a brutal conflict that cost tens of millions of lives. Its legacy, therefore, is not just one of technological achievement, but also of caution, a reminder of the destructive potential of human innovation when turned to the purposes of war. Even today, more than 8 decades after its first flight, the FW-190 continues to inspire awe and admiration. Restored examples still take to the skies at air shows, thrilling crowds with the roar of their engines and the grace of their flight. Historians continue to study its design and its impact, uncovering new insights into how it shaped, and was shaped by, the conflict that defined the 20th century. And aviation enthusiasts continue to celebrate it as one of the greatest fighters ever built, a machine that combined speed, power, and versatility in a way that few have matched before or since. In many ways, the FW-190 is more than just an aircraft. It is a story of ambition and innovation, of courage and sacrifice, of triumph and tragedy. It is a story that spans continents and decades, from the drawing boards of German engineers to the skies over Europe, from the chaos of war to the quiet halls of museums. And like all great stories, it continues to evolve, its meaning reshaped by each new generation that discovers it. The enduring fascination with the FW-190 is not just about nostalgia or historical curiosity. It's also because the aircraft embodies many of the qualities that define the evolution of warfare itself. It illustrates how nations innovate when faced with existential threats, how technology adapts to new challenges, and how even the most advanced weapons are ultimately constrained by the circumstances around them. In this way, the story of the FW-190 is also the story of World War II itself, a conflict in which human ingenuity was pushed to its absolute limits, producing technologies that were both awe-inspiring and terrifying. One of the most remarkable things about the FW-190 is how quickly it evolved in response to the shifting dynamics of the war. The aircraft that first flew in 1939 was a very different machine from the Ta-152 that roared into the skies in 1945. Over the course of just 6 years, the FW-190 transformed from a cutting-edge fighter into a high-altitude interceptor, a ground attack aircraft, a bomber-destroyer, and a desperate last-ditch defender. This rapid evolution was driven by necessity. Each new Allied innovation, each new strategic challenge, forced the Luftwaffe to adapt. And yet, despite these constant changes, the FW-190's core strengths remained consistent: speed, power, firepower, and ruggedness. These qualities made it a platform that could be reinvented again and again without losing its fundamental effectiveness. This adaptability reflected a broader truth about military technology. The most successful weapons are those that can evolve. Static designs quickly become obsolete in the face of changing threats, but adaptable platforms can remain relevant long after their initial conception. This lesson has been repeated countless times in the decades since World War II. The F-15 Eagle, for example, has remained in service for nearly half a century precisely because it was designed to be upgraded and modified over time. The same principle applied to the FW-190. Its robust airframe and versatile design allowed it to remain competitive even as the war around it changed dramatically. But adaptability was only part of the equation. The FW-190 was also a product of its time, shaped by the strategic realities of total war. Unlike peacetime aircraft, which could be optimized for specific missions or built without regard to cost, wartime aircraft had to balance performance with practicality. They had to be fast and powerful, but also easy to produce and maintain. They had to be deadly in combat, but also survivable enough to bring pilots home. And they had to be versatile enough to serve in multiple roles, because no nation, not even Germany, could afford to build a different aircraft for every mission. The FW-190 excelled in meeting these demands, striking a balance between performance and practicality that few other aircraft achieved. It's also important to remember that the FW-190 was not just a technological achievement. It was a logistical one. Building more than 20,000 of these complex machines during a time of relentless bombing, material shortages, and collapsing supply chains was a monumental feat. German industry faced enormous challenges in keeping production lines running, and yet the FW-190 continued to roll off assembly lines until the very end of the war. This was a testament not just to the aircraft's design, but to the determination and ingenuity of the engineers, factory workers, and logisticians who supported the Luftwaffe's war effort. For the men who flew the FW-190, these logistical efforts meant the difference between life and death. Pilots often spoke of their trust in the aircraft, how it could absorb punishment, how it responded predictably even under extreme stress, how it gave them confidence in combat. Many Luftwaffe veterans credited the FW-190 with saving their lives on multiple occasions, whether by shrugging off damage that would have destroyed a lesser aircraft or by giving them the speed and climb rate they needed to escape a losing fight. In a war where survival often came down to split-second decisions and sheer luck, that trust was invaluable. The same qualities that made the FW-190 a formidable weapon also made it a difficult opponent for the Allies. Throughout the war, Allied intelligence agencies devoted significant resources to studying the aircraft, analyzing captured examples and developing tactics to counter it. Detailed technical manuals were produced for pilots outlining the FW-190's strengths and weaknesses and offering advice on how to fight it. Allied pilots were trained to exploit its heavier weight in turning battles, to avoid prolonged head-on engagements with its superior firepower, and to use altitude and energy advantages whenever possible. Even so, many pilots admitted that facing an FW-190 in combat was a nerve-wracking experience, one that tested their skills and their courage to the limit. The aircraft's influence on air combat doctrine was profound. The Allies quickly realized that they could not rely solely on incremental improvements to existing designs. They needed new aircraft that could match or surpass the FW-190's performance. This realization accelerated the development of the Spitfire Mk9, the P-51 Mustang, and the late-war P-47 Thunderbolt variants, all of which were designed with the Butcher Bird in mind. These aircraft would go on to play pivotal roles in securing Allied air superiority, but they owed much of their existence to the challenge posed by the FW-190. Beyond its direct impact on World War II, the FW-190 also helped shape the future of aerial warfare in more subtle ways. The lessons it taught about speed, power, and firepower influenced not just post-war fighter design, but also broader military doctrine. Air forces around the world began to place greater emphasis on multi-role capabilities, on rapid adaptability, and on the integration of air power into combined arms operations. The era of the specialized single-mission fighter was coming to an end, and the era of the versatile all-purpose combat aircraft was beginning, an evolution that can be traced in part back to the lessons of the Butcher Bird. And yet, for all its technological and historical significance, the FW-190 remains, at its core, a deeply human story. It is the story of the engineers who poured their creativity and expertise into its design, often under immense pressure and in the face of overwhelming odds. It is the story of the pilots who risked, and often gave, their lives in its cockpit, flying missions that demanded extraordinary skill and bravery. And it is the story of the countless individuals whose lives were shaped by the battles it fought, the soldiers on the ground who looked up in fear or hope, the civilians who watched dogfights unfold above their cities, the families who waited anxiously for loved ones who never returned. The Butcher Bird was, in many ways, a symbol of its time, a time when the fate of nations was decided in the skies, and when technological innovation could mean the difference between victory and defeat. It was a product of a world at war, forged in the crucible of necessity, and honed by the relentless pressures of conflict. And though that world has long since passed into history, the lessons it taught and the machine that embodied them continue to shape our understanding of warfare, technology, and the human spirit. In exploring the legacy of the FW-190, it's also important to understand the broader context in which it was created, a context defined by intense competition, rapid technological advancement, and the brutal demands of a world at war. The Second World War was unlike any conflict before it. It was a total war, one that required nations to mobilize every resource, every industry, every ounce of ingenuity to achieve victory. It was also a war in which technology advanced at an unprecedented pace. Aircraft that had been state-of-the-art in 1939 were obsolete by 1942. Designs that seemed cutting-edge in 1943 were outdated by 1945. In this environment, the ability to innovate, and to do so quickly, was not just an advantage, it was a matter of survival. Germany understood this perhaps better than anyone. From the beginning of the war, the Luftwaffe had been at the forefront of aviation technology. The Bf 109 was a world-class fighter when it first entered service, and bombers like the Heinkel He 111 and the Junkers Ju 88 were among the most advanced of their kind. But as the war dragged on and the Allies ramped up their own technological efforts, Germany's initial advantages began to erode. The FW-190 was, in many ways, a response to this challenge, a deliberate attempt to regain the edge in a contest that was as much about innovation as it was about firepower. What made the FW-190 so significant in this context was not just its performance, but the speed with which it went from concept to combat. In just a few short years, Kurt Tank and his team transformed an idea into one of the most formidable fighters of the war. This rapid development was a testament to Germany's engineering prowess, but it was also a reflection of the pressures of wartime. There was no time for endless testing or perfectionist tweaks. The FW-190 had to be designed, built, and deployed as quickly as possible, and it had to work. The fact that it not only worked but excelled is a remarkable achievement, one that speaks to the skill and determination of everyone involved in its creation. Yet the FW-190's story also illustrates the limits of technology. No matter how advanced an aircraft was, it could not overcome fundamental strategic disadvantages. Germany's industrial base, while formidable, was simply not capable of matching the output of the United States and the Soviet Union. Its access to critical raw materials was increasingly constrained by Allied blockades. Its factories were bombed relentlessly, its transport networks disrupted, its workforce stretched thin. These realities meant that even the most advanced aircraft could not be produced in sufficient numbers, nor could they be maintained and supplied as effectively as those of the Allies. In the end, the Fw-190, like many of Germany's technological marvels, was a victim of the larger forces that shaped the war. This lesson, that technology alone cannot win a war, is one that has been repeated time and again throughout history. The Fw-190 was faster, more powerful, and more heavily armed than many of its opponents, yet it could not prevent Germany's defeat. It could win battles, but not the war. It could destroy bombers, but not stop the bombing campaign. It could challenge Allied fighters, but not overcome the sheer weight of their numbers. The same is true of many of history's most advanced weapons. They can provide an edge, sometimes a decisive one, but they cannot compensate for deeper strategic and logistical shortcomings. And yet, despite these limitations, the Fw-190 remains a powerful symbol of what technology can achieve. It shows how far human ingenuity can go when pushed by necessity. It demonstrates the value of bold ideas and innovative thinking. And it serves as a reminder that even in the darkest of times, creativity and skill can produce extraordinary results. The Butcher Bird was not just a weapon, it was a masterpiece of engineering, a machine that pushed the boundaries of what was possible with piston engine technology. It was a glimpse of the future, a future that would soon arrive in the form of jet propulsion, guided weapons, and supersonic flight. Indeed, one of the most fascinating aspects of the Fw-190's story is how it bridges two eras in aviation history. It was one of the last great piston engine fighters, but it was also a forerunner of the jet age. Many of the lessons learned from its design about aerodynamics, pilot ergonomics, and multi-role capability would be applied directly to the first generation of jet fighters. The transition from propeller-driven aircraft to jet-powered ones was not a clean break, but a continuum, and the Fw-190 sits squarely on that line, representing the pinnacle of one era and the foundation of the next. The aircraft's influence can even be seen in unexpected places. The philosophy of ruggedness and reliability that underpinned its design would later inform not just fighter aircraft but also military transport planes, helicopters, and even spacecraft. The idea that a vehicle should be able to take damage and keep functioning, that it should protect its crew and complete its mission even under adverse conditions, is now a fundamental principle of aerospace engineering. In this sense, the Butcher Bird has a legacy that extends far beyond the battlefield and far beyond the 1940s. At the same time, the Fw-190's story is also a human story, one that reminds us of the people behind the machines. Behind every aircraft was a team of engineers who worked tirelessly to solve complex technical problems. Behind every sortie was a ground crew that labored day and night to keep the planes flying, and behind every mission was a pilot who risked his life each time he took to the skies. These were not faceless cogs in a war machine. They were individuals with hopes, fears, and families caught up in the whirlwind of a conflict far larger than themselves. Their contributions and their sacrifices are an integral part of the Fw-190's legacy. In remembering the Butcher Bird, we also remember them. We remember the engineers who pushed the limits of their craft to design something extraordinary. We remember the mechanics who kept the aircraft flying under impossible conditions. We remember the pilots who fought and died in its cockpit, many of them barely more than boys. And we remember the countless people, soldiers and civilians alike, whose lives were touched by the battles it fought. Their stories are inseparable from the story of the aircraft itself, and they give it a depth and a humanity that no technical specification ever could. The human side of the Fw-190 story is perhaps most vividly illustrated in the experiences of the pilots who flew it into battle. For many Luftwaffe aviators, the Butcher Bird was more than just a machine. It was an extension of themselves, a partner in the deadly dance of aerial combat. They spoke of how it responded to their touch, how it seemed to anticipate their movements, how it gave them the confidence to take on opponents who might otherwise have outmatched them. To fly an Fw-190 was to feel a unique sense of power and control, a sense that the aircraft was not just a tool, but an ally. One pilot, reflecting years after the war, described the Fw-190 as a fighter that forgave mistakes. He meant that it was stable, responsive, and predictable even under extreme conditions, qualities that could mean the difference between life and death in combat. Another recalled how the aircraft's rugged construction had saved his life on more than one occasion. allowing him to limp back to base with severe battle damage that would have destroyed a lesser machine. These testimonials, repeated again and again in memoirs and interviews, paint a picture of an aircraft that inspired deep trust and affection among those who flew it, even as it demanded the utmost skill and courage. But for all its strengths, flying the FW-190 was never easy. The conditions were harsh, the missions dangerous, and the odds often overwhelming. Luftwaffe pilots faced an enemy that grew stronger with each passing month, fielding ever more advanced aircraft in ever greater numbers. They faced relentless bomber raids, deadly anti-aircraft fire, and the constant threat of mechanical failure or fuel shortages. They fought in bitter cold and sweltering heat, often from makeshift airfields with minimal support. And they did it all, knowing that their chances of survival were slim. By 1944, the average life expectancy of a German fighter pilot on the Western Front was measured in weeks. Despite these grim realities, many pilots fought with extraordinary skill and bravery. Aces like Gerhard Barkhorn, Günter Rahl, and Walter Nowotny achieved staggering numbers of aerial victories, often more than 200 each, many of them while flying the FW-190. These men became legends within the Luftwaffe, celebrated as heroes by their comrades and feared by their enemies. But even lesser-known pilots, those who never achieved ace status or whose names have been lost to history, played a crucial role in the air war. Every sortie they flew, every bomber they intercepted, every mission they completed was part of the larger effort to defend Germany's skies. The bond between pilot and aircraft was mirrored by the equally important bond between pilot and ground crew. The men and women who maintained the FW-190 worked under extraordinary pressure, often in dangerous conditions, to keep the aircraft flying. They repaired battle damage, replaced worn-out parts, and prepared the planes for mission after mission, often with limited tools and dwindling supplies. Their work was physically demanding and mentally exhausting, and it was rarely acknowledged outside the airfields where it took place. Yet without their dedication and expertise, the FW-190 could not have fulfilled its role. Every successful mission was as much a testament to their skill as to that of the pilots who flew it. The aircraft also played a role in the lives of those far from the front lines. Civilians on both sides of the conflict experienced the presence of the FW-190 in ways that were often terrifying. For Allied bomber crews, it was a deadly predator, appearing suddenly out of the sun to unleash torrents of cannon fire. For civilians in occupied Europe, it was a symbol of German power, patrolling the skies above their towns and cities. And for the German population, it was both a source of pride and a reminder of the war's grim realities, a symbol of resistance in the face of overwhelming odds, but also a sign of how desperate those odds had become. This duality, the coexistence of pride and fear, admiration and horror, is part of what makes the FW-190 such a compelling subject of study. It embodies the contradictions of war itself, the heroism and the tragedy, the innovation and the destruction, the triumphs of engineering and the failures of humanity. It is a machine that inspires awe, but also one that forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of conflict and the costs of technological progress. The story of the FW-190 is also a story of contrasts, between early success and eventual defeat, between technological brilliance and strategic failure, between the individual courage of pilots and the overwhelming might of industrialized warfare. In its early years, the aircraft was a symbol of German superiority, a weapon that dominated the skies and struck fear into the hearts of Allied airmen. By the end of the war, it was a symbol of desperation, thrown into battle again and again against impossible odds. These contrasting roles reflect the broader arc of Germany's war effort, from the heady days of early victories to the catastrophic collapse of the Third Reich. Yet even in defeat, the FW-190 story is not one of failure. On the contrary, it is a story of remarkable achievement, of an aircraft that exceeded the expectations of its designers, that pushed the boundaries of what was possible with piston engine technology, and that continued to evolve and adapt long after many of its contemporaries had been rendered obsolete. It is a story of innovation under pressure, of determination in the face of adversity, and of a relentless pursuit of excellence that produced one of the greatest fighters of all time. Looking back today, it is easy to see the FW-190 as a relic of a bygone era of propeller-driven flight, of dogfights fought at close range, of wars waged by industrial powers locked in existential struggle, and yet its legacy endures. It lives on in the principles that guide modern aircraft design, in the doctrines that shape air combat strategy, and in the stories of the men and women who built, flew, and maintained it. It lives on in the lessons it teaches, lessons about innovation, adaptability, and the limits of technology in the face of overwhelming force. Most of all, it lives on in the imagination. To this day, the sight of an FW-190, whether in a museum, in the pages of a history book, or soaring through the skies at an air show, evokes a powerful response. It is a reminder of a time when the fate of nations was decided in the air, when the line between victory and defeat was measured in altitude and airspeed, and when the courage of a single pilot could change the course of a battle. It is a reminder of the extraordinary heights humanity can reach and the terrible costs that often accompany that ascent. As we move deeper into the story of the FW-190, it becomes clear that its significance goes far beyond its technical specifications or combat record. It is, at its core, a reflection of the era that created it, an era defined by total war, by unprecedented technological innovation, and by a race for dominance in every domain of conflict. The FW-190 did not emerge in isolation. It was part of a broader ecosystem of innovation, a piece of a vast and complex puzzle that included tanks, ships, artillery, radar systems, and eventually, nuclear weapons. Each of these technologies was shaped by the same pressures, the same desperate need for advantage, the same willingness to experiment, the same relentless drive to push the boundaries of what was possible. In many ways, the FW-190 can be seen as a microcosm of the German war effort itself. At its best, it represented the pinnacle of engineering excellence, a beautifully designed, meticulously crafted machine that combined cutting-edge technology with practical effectiveness. It was the product of a culture that valued precision, efficiency, and innovation, and it showcased the extraordinary capabilities of Germany's industrial base. But it also reflected the flaws and contradictions of that war effort. Like many of Germany's most advanced weapons, it was produced in insufficient numbers to have a decisive strategic impact. It was introduced too late to change the course of the conflict, and it was ultimately undermined by the larger economic and logistical realities of a war that Germany could not win. This tension, between brilliance and futility, between tactical success and strategic failure, is central to understanding the FW-190's place in history. On a tactical level, it was an extraordinary success. It dominated the skies over Western Europe for much of the war, forced the Allies to accelerate their own aircraft development programs, and inflicted enormous losses on enemy bombers and fighters alike. Its adaptability allowed it to remain relevant even as the war changed around it, and its influence extended far beyond the Luftwaffe to shape the strategies and doctrines of Allied air forces. But on a strategic level, it was ultimately a failure, not because it was flawed, but because it was fighting a war that could not be won with technology alone. This paradox is one of the reasons the FW-190 continues to fascinate historians and enthusiasts alike. It is a story that invites complex questions and resists simple answers. Was it the best fighter of the war? In many ways, yes. Its combination of speed, firepower, and versatility was unmatched by most of its contemporaries. But did it win the war for Germany? No, because no aircraft, no matter how advanced, could have overcome the sheer weight of Allied industrial production and manpower. It was, in the end, both a triumph and a failure, a masterpiece of engineering that could not change the outcome of the conflict it was built to fight. The paradox of the FW-190 is also a human one. The aircraft inspired deep loyalty and affection among the pilots who flew it, but it also took a terrible toll on their lives. It was a source of pride for German engineers and aviation enthusiasts, but also a tool of destruction that contributed to immense suffering. It represented both the heights of human creativity and the depths of human destructiveness. To study the FW-190 is to confront these contradictions head-on, to acknowledge that technological brilliance and moral complexity are often intertwined, and that even the most beautiful machines can be instruments of terrible violence. It's this complexity that makes the FW-190's legacy so rich and enduring. It is not just a chapter in the history of aviation, but a lens through which we can explore broader themes of war, technology, and humanity. It raises fundamental questions about the role of innovation in conflict. Does better technology make war more likely, or does it deter it? Does it make wars shorter and less destructive, or does it prolong and intensify them? The story of the FW-190 suggests that the answers to these questions are rarely simple. Technology can shape the course of a war, but it cannot control it. It can give one side an advantage, but it cannot guarantee victory. And it can make war more efficient, but it cannot make it less brutal. These questions are not just historical curiosities, They are as relevant today as they were in the 1940s. The rapid development of new military technologies, from drones and hypersonic missiles to artificial intelligence and cyber warfare, echoes the innovation race of World War II. Nations once again find themselves locked in a competition to develop weapons that can provide an edge on the battlefield. And just as in the past, there is a temptation to believe that technology alone can solve strategic problems, that a breakthrough in one domain can guarantee dominance in all others. The story of the FW-190 is a powerful reminder of the dangers of that mindset. It shows that technology is only one part of a much larger equation, and that without strategy, logistics, and political will, even the most advanced weapons can fail to deliver victory. At the same time, the FW-190 offers valuable lessons about what technology can achieve. It demonstrates the power of innovation to reshape the battlefield, to force adversaries to adapt, and to change the trajectory of a conflict. It shows how a single breakthrough in engine design, in aerodynamics, in weapons integration can have cascading effects across multiple domains of warfare. And it illustrates the importance of versatility, adaptability, and balance, qualities that remain just as essential in modern military technology as they were in the 1940s. Perhaps the most enduring lesson of all, though, is that technology is ultimately a reflection of the people who create and use it. The FW-190 was not an autonomous force. It was a tool wielded by human beings, shaped by their decisions, their values, and their ambitions. It was the product of human creativity and ingenuity, but also of human fear and aggression. It was built to defend a nation, but also to advance a regime's expansionist ambitions. Its legacy is therefore inseparable from the moral and political context of the war in which it was used, a context that continues to shape how we remember it today. As we look back on the story of the FW-190, we see not just an aircraft, but a mirror, one that reflects both the best and the worst of humanity. It shows us what we are capable of when we harness our intellect and creativity in pursuit of a goal, but it also shows us the consequences of using that creativity in the service of destruction. It is a reminder that technology, no matter how advanced, is never neutral. It is shaped by the choices we make, and it, in turn, shapes the world we create. The story of the FW-190, then, is not merely the story of an airplane. It is the story of humanity's complex relationship with technology in times of war. It is a story of ambition and ingenuity, of bravery and sacrifice, of triumph and tragedy. It reminds us that the machines we build are never just machines. They are embodiments of our values, our priorities, our fears, and our hopes. They reflect who we are, what we believe in, and what we are willing to fight for. And they often outlive the conflicts that gave birth to them, continuing to shape the world long after the guns have fallen silent. In this sense, the FW-190 is more than a relic of World War II. It is a living artifact, a tangible link to a past that continues to shape our present. It is a reminder of how far we have come in our understanding of flight, of engineering, and of war. It is also a warning of the costs that come with those advances. Every rivet and panel tells a story of the human labor that built it. Every scorch mark and bullet hole on the surviving examples tells a story of the battles it fought. And every preserved aircraft in a museum stands as a silent witness to the lives lost and the lives saved in its shadow. For those who study the history of aviation, the FW-190 is an object of endless fascination. Its design is a masterclass in engineering compromise, a delicate balance of speed, power, agility, and durability. Its performance is a testament to the potential of piston engine technology pushed to its absolute limits. And its evolution over the course of the war demonstrates how adaptability can extend the lifespan of even the most complex and sophisticated machines. It is a case study in how innovation emerges not just from inspiration but from necessity, how the pressures of war can accelerate technological progress in ways that peacetime rarely does. But beyond the technical and historical details, the FW-190 is also a deeply human story, one filled with emotion, contradiction, and complexity. For the German pilots who flew it, it was a source of pride and confidence, a machine they trusted with their lives. For the Allied pilots who fought against it, it was a deadly adversary, one that commanded respect and demanded their best efforts. For the civilians who saw it overhead, whether in fear or in relief, it was a symbol of power, of hope, or of dread. And for the generations that followed, it has become a symbol of history itself, a tangible link to a past that continues to resonate in the present. There is also a more subtle lesson in the story of the FW-190, one about the nature of innovation itself. Too often we think of technological progress as a linear march forward, a story of steady improvement over time. But the reality is often far messier. Innovation is rarely a straight line. It is a series of leaps and setbacks, of breakthroughs and dead ends, of ideas that succeed and ideas that fail. The FW190 embodies this reality. It was not the result of a single genius idea, but of countless iterations, experiments, and compromises. It evolved in response to changing circumstances, adapting to new threats and new opportunities. And in doing so, it demonstrated that the path to innovation is not about perfection from the start. It is about the willingness to adapt, to learn, and to change. This lesson applies far beyond the world of aviation. It applies to every field where technology plays a role, from medicine to space exploration, from energy to artificial intelligence. The principles that made the FW190 successful, adaptability, balance, versatility, are the same principles that underpin successful innovation in any domain. They remind us that the most effective solutions are often those that can evolve over time, that can respond to new challenges, and that can find a balance between competing priorities. The butcherbird also reminds us of the importance of context. A machine is only as effective as the environment in which it operates. The FW190 was a superb fighter aircraft, but its impact was shaped by the broader realities of the war, by the industrial capacity of the nations involved, by the strategies they pursued, by the resources available to them. This context determined how many FW190s could be built, how they could be deployed, and how effective they could be. It also determined their ultimate fate. No matter how advanced the aircraft was, it could not change the fact that Germany was fighting a losing war on multiple fronts. This is a crucial reminder that technology, no matter how powerful, does not exist in a vacuum. It is always shaped and limited by the circumstances around it. Today, as we grapple with new technological challenges and opportunities, this lesson is more relevant than ever. We live in an age of rapid innovation, one in which new technologies are transforming every aspect of our lives. But as the story of the FW190 shows, technology alone is never enough. It must be supported by strategy, by infrastructure, by human expertise, and by ethical considerations. Without these, even the most advanced machines can fail to achieve their potential, or worse, they can become tools of destruction and oppression. And perhaps this is the most important lesson of all. Technology is what we make of it. The same creativity and ingenuity that produced the FW190 could be used to build tools that save lives, explore new worlds, or solve humanity's greatest challenges. Or it could be used to wage war, to destroy, and to dominate. The choice is ours, as it has always been. The story of the FW190 is a powerful reminder of the responsibility that comes with technological power and of the need to wield that power wisely. As we reflect on the legacy of the butcherbird, we are reminded not just of its place in history, but of its relevance to the present and the future. It is a story that speaks to the enduring power of innovation, to the complexity of war, and to the dual-edged nature of human creativity. It is a story that challenges us to think critically about the technologies we create, the purposes we use them for, and the kind of world we want those technologies to build. As our journey through the story of the FW190 comes to an end, it's worth stepping back and considering what this remarkable machine truly represents. On the surface, it is a story about an airplane, about its design, its performance, its battles, and its legacy. But beneath that surface lies something much deeper. The FW190 is a symbol of the 20th century itself, a century defined by unimaginable technological progress, by conflicts that reshaped the world, and by the complex relationship between human creativity and human destructiveness. It is a testament to what we can achieve when we push ourselves to the limits of innovation, and a cautionary tale about the consequences of where that innovation can lead. In the end, the FW190 was a machine born of desperation. It was conceived at a time when Germany sought to dominate the skies, when the Luftwaffe was a fearsome force and victory still seemed within reach. But it came of age in a very different world, one in which Germany was on the defensive, outnumbered, outproduced, and outmatched. In this sense, the butcherbird reflects the arc of the war itself, a story that began with ambition and aggression and ended with ruin and surrender. It soared to incredible heights, achieved extraordinary things, and yet, in the end, It could not escape the forces that shaped its destiny. And yet, it would be wrong to view the FW-190 purely through the lens of defeat. Its legacy is far richer and more nuanced than that. It changed the course of the air war, forcing the Allies to adapt, innovate, and rethink their strategies. It inspired generations of engineers and pilots, shaping the development of aircraft for decades to come. It demonstrated the power of versatility and adaptability, proving that a single platform could excel in multiple roles. And it showed that even in the most desperate of circumstances, human ingenuity could produce machines of extraordinary capability and beauty. The FW-190 story is also a reminder of the human dimension of war, of the men and women whose lives were bound up with the machine in ways both profound and tragic. It reminds us of the pilots who climbed into their cockpits knowing they might never return. It reminds us of the ground crews who worked tirelessly to keep the aircraft flying, even as bombs fell around them. It reminds us of the civilians who looked up at the sky and saw in the silhouette of a butcher bird either a protector or a predator. These human stories are what give the FW-190 its true meaning. Without them, it is just metal and machinery. With them, it is a symbol of courage, of sacrifice, of innovation, and of the complex, often contradictory nature of war itself. There's also a timelessness to the story of the FW-190, the questions it raises about the relationship between technology and power, about the role of innovation in conflict, about the ethical responsibilities that come with technological progress, are as relevant today as they were in the 1940s. We still grapple with these questions as we develop new weapons, new technologies, and new forms of warfare. We still wrestle with the tension between using technology to protect and to destroy. And we still face the challenge of ensuring that the tools we create serve the best interests of humanity, rather than its worst instincts. In this sense, the FW-190 is more than just a chapter in the history of aviation. It is a chapter in the ongoing story of humanity itself. It shows us what we are capable of when we are driven by necessity, when we channel our creativity towards solving difficult problems. It also shows us the dangers of allowing that creativity to be guided by aggression, fear, or ideology. It is both an inspiration and a warning, a symbol of what we can achieve, and a reminder of the consequences of what we choose to do with that achievement. Today, more than 80 years after it first took to the skies, the FW-190 still commands our attention. Restored examples continue to fly at air shows, their engines roaring as they once did over Europe's battlefields. Museums preserve them as artifacts of history, their scarred metal skins bearing silent witness to the conflicts they once fought. Historians and enthusiasts continue to study them, debate them, and marvel at them. And audiences like you, watching this video, continue to be captivated by their story. Because the story of the FW-190 is not just about the past. It is about who we are, who we were, and who we might yet become. So as we close the book on the FW-190, let us remember it not just as a machine of war, but as a symbol of the complex, often contradictory nature of human progress. Let us remember the innovation that made it possible, the courage that brought it to life, and the destruction it was designed to unleash. Let us remember the lessons it teaches about the power of adaptability, the importance of strategy, and the limits of technology. And above all, let us remember the people whose lives it touched, the pilots, the engineers, the soldiers, the civilians, whose stories are forever intertwined with the legacy of the butcher bird. Because in the end, the story of the FW-190 is not just a story about World War II, it is a story about us, about our capacity for brilliance and for destruction, for creativity and for cruelty, for innovation and for war. It is a story that challenges us to think critically about the technologies we create, the purposes we use them for, and the kind of world we want those technologies to shape. And it is a story that reminds us that even in the darkest moments of history, there is light, the light of human ingenuity, of resilience, of the relentless drive to push beyond our limits. The butcher bird may have been born of war, but its legacy transcends it. It stands today as a testament to the heights humanity can reach, and as a warning of the depths to which we can fall. It is a symbol of a time when the fate of nations was decided in the skies, and of the enduring truth that even the most extraordinary machines are ultimately reflections of the people who build and use them. And so, as we watch the FW-190 fade into the distant horizon, its engines roar echoing faintly across the decades, we are left with a final, lingering thought. that the story of this remarkable aircraft is, in the end, the story of us all. It is a story of ambition and ingenuity, of power and peril, of triumph and tragedy. It is a story that will continue to resonate for generations to come, as long as there are people who look to the skies and wonder what it means to fly.